So, hello.
Hello.
To start off with, would you like to say your name and where you are right now?
Yes, my name is Zish, Rosenbach-Ziembinski,
Hmm,
and I live in a town called Margaret River, which is in the southwest of Australia.
okay. I'm curious about your name, Zish. Does it have a meaning? I really had no idea who I was going to see when I saw that name.
Yeah, it's my name is not really my name, so,
Okay.
but it is my name. So it's an Anglo-Saxonized version of an old Polish name. So my original name, the name I was given, is Zdzisław or Zdziszu or Zish, but it couldn't be said. It can't be pronounced in English. So, and I live in Australia, so Zish or Zdziszu became Zish.
Okay. I was wondering where that came from.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the first real question that I have for you is who are you? Who are you as a person, as a human being? And that can be, speak to your values or your passions, your interests, anything about you that you'd feel like sharing.
Well, right now I feel a bit sweaty. uh, so I'm a private person. It's not that easy for me to come out. It's easier than it used to be, but always when I meet somebody new, there's a certain tension in my body and a slight discomfort, which gradually eases. Uh, and I guess that's a lot about how I am. Well, it's a big part of who I am. Not well. There's a lot more to me, but that's a part that I'm often attending to initially.
Mm-hmm.
It reflects a certain stance um, that I've never really been able to shake or get rid of, which is a slightly paranoid position in the world,
Oh,
where one expects trouble
yeah.
on the one hand and hopes that that's not the case.
I hope not. I
No,
don't.
no, but it's no.
Hmm.
I think it's well. Well. I think I don't know for sure, but of course I've done a lot of considering and over the years. I'm in my early 70s. I think it's to do with being a refugee person, refugee child. My parents were refugees after the war, and it's got a lot to do with the anxiety and the deep concerns and the trauma that my parents went through in Poland during the war.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so I'm a careful person. I'm uh, I'm considerate, and sometimes I'm careless and neglectful, and have to be told I'm doing something or not doing something that I'm not aware of. Uh, I'm glad that I'm able to hear that much more. It was harder
Mm-hmm.
when I was younger. I have right now a sense of wanting to say a lot, but containing myself.
Okay.
Which is one
We
of the
can
things
circle back to it at the end if you want.
but what did you say? Go back
I
to?
said we can circle back to this question of who you are at the end.
Yeah, sure,
But
sure. Sure.
sure, if you want to. I mean, another slightly more to the left or to the right of you kind of question is what comes to mind as an event or a set of circumstances in your life that may have shaped or influenced who you are?
Yeah, what comes to mind immediately is it's connected to what you question about my name, and that's about feeling unacceptable for being different,
Mm-hmm.
particularly as a migrant child. So a Polish background, very European background, and living in an English-speaking, somewhat British-orientated. When I was a child, it was very much a British country here in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So that I think I always carried a sense that I was unacceptable and striving to be in some way acceptable to my friends and teachers and the broader community.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very, very sensitive about not being accepted, and I think there are issues of shame around that for me. I have a memory which I tell myself is a memory. I'm pretty sure it is a memory, but you know how we tell ourselves stories.
Mm-hmm.
But it's connected again to my name, which is that when I started school here in Australia, I think I remember being in the class and the teacher asking all the children what their names were. And so each child would say their name, and then it was my turn, and I said my name was Jishu. And she said, "That's not a name, we'll call you John." So
Oh.
that kind of experience, I think, has shaped me quite a lot, but I've also spent years trying to unshape me, but it's quite difficult.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry to have started off on that. It was just honestly curiosity. Yeah.
No, it's relevant. Yeah, it's relevant.
Mm.
Yeah, so that in my work as a therapist and trainer, I'm often harping on about living with differences. So,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah, I go through that daily myself. I mean, I'm
Sure.
not a refugee kind of migrant. I'm a choiceful, privileged migrant to Mexico, but every day it's the story of my name as well. So,
Yeah, you have quite an English name.
yes, stands out in Mexico among all the
Mm,
Marias in my
mm,
area.
mm.
So I'm wondering, in your life, from whatever aspect or area you would like, what comes to mind as another person who you identify as someone who's influenced you or impacted who you are in some significant way?
Many people. Of course, I want to say my mother, and that's true, but I'll leave her for the time being. I think as a young adolescent and a young man, I was looking for a father, okay, because my father largely ignored me. And I think so that with that question, there are men in my life that have been very important, that have taught me a lot, usually in the context of therapy or training.
Mm.
Okay. So probably the most important first person was my first therapist when I was in my mid-20s, late 20s. And the experience I had that was so important was that he didn't do anything other than listen to me, and I hadn't had that experience before in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So that was it was a very sweet experience. But I saw him in the context my parents had died in succession, and I wasn't coping very well.
Mm.
But once I got past weeping for weeks, I noticed that he was listening to me, and I think that somehow changed what I saw was possible. Okay, it made a big difference, and so that it also that experience over the time I saw him was so important to me that I decided to become a therapist. So I was heading towards an academic career, but I thought, no, this is worthwhile. I think I'd like to spend my life doing this
Mm.
work, okay, in the way that he did it. He wasn't a Gestalt therapist. He would be probably he was a Gestalt therapist, but he wasn't. He was just a very wise, tuned-in man with a spiritual bent. So he also guided me towards Eastern mysticism, and I spent years in that area before I found Gestalt therapy. Meditating and going to India and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, he was very important. He's still alive. He's 89. And we sometimes catch up.
That's exciting. That's a privilege.
He still laughs at me, and he reminds me of things of how I was those years ago. And he laughs. We laugh together.
Well, that's good, as long as you're laughing together.
And then, of course, I've met many other people that have made a difference in my life, that not only made a difference, but I've come to love and be loved by them, including my wife, who I met 34 years ago. When we met, she was one of the many people we invited to Perth. I lived in Perth, which is the capital city of Western Australia. Our training program back in the early 80s was based on inviting mostly North American trainers.
Right.
But Claudia, my wife, had come from Berlin, so she was one of those people that came out and ran workshops for us before we could do the work ourselves.
And she stayed?
Did she what?
She stayed.
Did she stay? She stayed. She's still here. She's in the next room preparing herself for yoga.
Okay.
But it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. She very, very difficult to adjust to a new country when you're an adult.
Yes.
You probably know.
It's complicated. So I'm curious, how did you then come into Gestalt from this non-Gestalt therapist, but that direction? What was your initial experience?
Yeah. Years ago, I would have said, because I'd read a lot of the Gestalt literature, and it really made sense. So I would have given you a rational, I could name a whole lot of things that I thought were useful and effective. But years later, I'm now coming to the conclusion that I came to Gestalt because I was rebelling against my mother.
Oh.
Which is kind of crazy. I mean, structurally, there were a whole lot of psychologists in Perth who were looking for some training, and there was no training in Australia 40 years ago. So we started to contract people to come in. Right. But we put a lot of energy into that, and what I understand now is something like, when I lived with my family, even though we lived in Australia, we lived in Poland. So they simply transported Poland or Polish culture before the war to our household. So we spoke Polish and ate Polish food and sung Polish carols at Christmas and all the things that people that are Polish do, or did at least before the war. And I remember as a young adolescent really being annoyed with it, that my parents were living in the past. They weren't interested in their current context. They created a pre-war Polish culture in our home. So that made it very difficult for me to just be an Aussie boy, an Australian boy, because that was all disgusting and unacceptable and uncultured and so on. So I remember feeling very annoyed about that, but being powerless. And also my mother would say to me, don't trust anybody, always expect trouble. She had of course they came out of her own trauma, losing family and watching what happened in Poland where millions of people were slaughtered. And then there's something else about what she did. She'd also say over and over again that it's the way it is. You can't really control your life. You don't have any control in your life. So there's,
Wow.
so he comes along, Gestalt comes along, and I'm reading this stuff. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you have agency in your life,
Exactly.
and it's an optimistic perspective on living. It's about possibilities, and of course, it's the here and now, not the past or what. Well,
Mm-hmm.
it's past, but you know. So I think at some deep unconscious level, I rebelled against my mother. I'm no longer going to do what the way you see things, and so you know. But it wasn't. It didn't seem that way. It just seemed like a rational decision. But it was also some deep, um, some attempt to disengage from a deep confluence that you know, and then over the years, of course, I am paranoid. Well, not so much now. But I see those thoughts coming up, but I can put them aside usually.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, sometimes the paranoid people are right.
Yeah, of course, there's some truth in it. And of course, we have agency in our life, and of course, we also don't in many ways. Okay, that's also true.
I mean, not to get into interpreting your story or anything, but when you come from a context where it's already been proven that the worst can happen and that you effectively can't trust your own neighbor, I mean, I don't know if anyone can ever unlearn that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's they're pretty profound experiences, and also, and so, well, it's not just the people that experience those directly; it's also their children that, in some way, pick it up. And
Right. I mean, you can't unlearn it, and it seems like a really important lesson to pass on.
mm.
Hmm. It does not let you just be an Aussie boy, though, does it? So,
Yeah, I've also moved on, and I know now my mother, who died 45 years ago, loved me and my sister, and
mhm.
did what she could. Yeah.
Hmm.
I didn't years ago.
Ah. Hmm. So I'm curious, when you get into Gestalt and you start bringing these people in and bringing these books into more experienced, lived kind of ways, what is it that you found that attracted you or attracts you that keeps you still around in this circle?
I don't know. I find people interesting.
Me too.
I never cease to be amazed.
Hmm.
I don't carry a sense that I want to help people.
Okay.
I used to. That was like some glorious aim or purpose. But no, I think it's more that I want to know people, and I want to help people to know themselves, which I find an interesting exercise because it's an endless learning thing that, and I know that in myself that I keep surprising myself
Mhm.
in understanding something or recognizing what I'm doing, noticing stuff.
Mhm.
Um, so it's it's the dynamic kind of ever opening up of something new that you don't know, that you didn't know, that interests me, both in myself and in my clients or helping my clients. Of course, not all clients are interested in that, so some are, not all.
That's true.
Most people come to therapy with quite a strong consumer attitude. Do something, fix me, and I'll pay you. That kind of stuff.
Mhm. Hmm.
But you don't know what will happen.
That's true.
That shifts as well over time.
Well, they might become a therapist. They might really like it.
Yeah, many do. Many. I've been doing this work for 40 years, so I know a lot of people.
Mhm. And do you feel like you're part of a Gestalt community? That's a phrase that I hear a lot, and I wonder if it means anything to you in your experience.
No, I don't. I listened to a few of the interviews that you've done, and that question came up, and I don't feel. I don't think there is a Gestalt community. I think there's a lot of people who are like-minded, and there's a
Mhm.
lot of personal connections. I have that. I have a lot of people I've met over the years who I love and care about. I love being with. I stay in contact with off and on. They're personal connections.
Okay.
I think we're not exactly, when you talk about a community, it's bordering on something like a sect. I don't think we are. I mean, but we have similar values, and we don't always see it the same way. But we are, I think, on a learning journey of learning and discovering in that way. But we also, there are other values like we value goodwill and authenticity and truth and honesty. I think. In that way, but that doesn't, we're not distinct that way.
Right.
We're not unique in that way. There are many, many more people out there that have similar orientations in life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think Gestalt therapy, I think it's wonderful. It's an extremely functional and effective way of learning about process. But we've borrowed a lot. When we get shitty when other modalities borrow and take. They're just assimilating stuff that we understand. But we also did that over the years. There's nothing really unique. That the way we think about and the way we work is in many traditions that go back thousands of years, I think. So no, I don't mean that in a negative way, that I'm not. I do feel part of something, but the Gestalt community. And if I
Mm-hmm.
meet somebody who's got a Gestalt background, at least there's an assumption, oh, we understand each other, but that's not
Right.
always true. That's not always true.
No, it's not. And I'm sitting here because I never really know what a Gestalt community would be to the person I'm speaking with either. And some people talk about it as if it were like a universally defined thing that you
No, I
sort
don't
of
agree.
sign up to or belong to. But it's much more gray than that.
We tried. I was part of back in the late '90s, part of setting up an organisation called Gestalt Australia and New Zealand. You probably heard of GANS, or maybe you haven't. Doesn't
Mhm.
matter. It was like the AAGT, and we set it up with the hope of having some. Before that, there were a number of institutes in Australia that had nothing to do with each other and didn't talk to each other. So we
Right.
thought we would have some sort of association or affiliation, and it went well for a while.
The honeymoon period?
It went very well for a while.
Hmm.
And then gradually became a regulatory body, and then there was all this infighting, and eventually it died a couple of years ago, and then
I thought it was
resurrected.
still alive.
Oh no, it died. It completely, they shut it down, but
Oh,
they resurrected it in the original form.
no.
And another attempt to have a,
So it died,
no,
but it's much better now. It's doing okay.
well, it's back to what I think what we planned, like a way of meeting and sharing ideas, but not controlling each other or fighting with each other.
Huh.
That's the way it goes. It's not. I'm not cynical about it, but on the other hand, there are lots of good and personal and deep connections between people that I value. So I
Hmm.
think it's a personal thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm laughing with you with all due respect to all of your Australian colleagues, but just hearing the way that each individual describes processes that other people are also involved in, it's fascinating. I mean, really, it is, everybody's world is a completely different set of perspectives on the
Mm,
experience.
mm,
So,
mm,
yeah.
mm.
So I'm wondering what it is that you in particular have done within Gestalt. What is your particular interest or your area or your focus?
What have I done? Uh, well, I put a lot of effort, energy, interest, time, money into my own training.
Hmm.
And that took a long time because I had a long way to go. some people are lucky and others aren't so lucky. So in terms of what you need to work through, and so that's one thing. Then in doing that, while I was doing that, I started working. I trained as a clinical psychologist before, long time before. But then we started our training program in Perth in 1981. By, I think, 84, I had joined the faculty as a trainer. Well before I should have.
Oh.
But because I was intelligent, I could get away with it. So I didn't continue to learn working as a trainer, but put a lot of energy into the training program we had in Perth, and I'm not quite sure what the question was. It's just been such a big part of my life. It's sort of, apart from family and people I love, it's the most important thing that I'm interested in. So, so I've been training people now for 35 years. This is the first year, because of the pandemic, that I'm not rushing off to workshops. I'm not heading off to Europe to join Gestalt at their European workshop. I'm not running, it's like it's just been ongoing. So that's like, I feel a deep interest and commitment and a dedication to that process. So I'm willing to put myself out in my quiet way. I don't look like I'm doing a lot, but I'm doing a lot. Does that make sense?
It does. No, it does.
Yeah.
Supporting institutional development and training is not a little.
No. It's been a great joy, but it's been difficult too, because it's very tiring when you got workshop after workshop, and then also clients, because my main source of income is my practice. So our training institute's never been the source of our income, but it's been the source of a lot of joy and interest, and so on. Yeah, so I'm a dedicated character. Some would say obsessive, out of control.
Okay.
When I do something, I do it well.
Okay. And when you talk about,
I try to do it well.
So when you talk about, these processes of developing institutions and being sort of at the base of an organization, or maybe even in your own practice, I don't know, what would you say some of the challenges that you've run into on your Gestalt path have been?
Well, two things come to mind. One is about organisation, that is running a training institute, and the complexity of, well, not just the everyday complexity, but the issue of competing interests or different perspectives or power struggles. Or there's that whole area of, which is maybe not a lot to do with Gestalt, but well, maybe it has. But there's that side of it. But there's also, from my own personal struggle, is learning to not have such high standards, or expect. I used to expect a lot more from trainees, and I'm much more accepting of where each person is now. That's been my own personal struggle, is to calm down a bit and see what's there and see how it works, and be more respectful of the way people are organised and the way they interact, and not be pushing so much like I might have done 20 years ago. So that's been a big thing for me, is to ease off and learn to appreciate what there is there, and not try to make it more or better or different or more functional. Or I guess that's also Gestalt, but which is a contradiction, because I, on the one hand, I've spent all these years living with these values and principles, particularly in my own life, but I'm such a pushy man, and when I do something myself, it's got to be exactly right. So I allow myself to do that, but I've stopped doing that so much. I stopped projecting my standards and ideals, I think, to a large extent, although my wife would disagree.
Well, I can't wait to meet her. So, Hmm. But
Just
I mean,
yesterday,
it's difficult because it's inherently in that therapist training process that there will be a push that you will have that standard.
yeah, 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 yeah.
I mean, you can't just let everyone be and pass everyone. Otherwise, what is the training process?
Yeah.
That's just my internal struggle as a
Yeah, okay.
Gestalt
Yeah.
trainer as
No,
well.
the passing isn't, I don't think the passing or not passing is that important anymore. I know other institutes do. I think it's more the just recognizing where people are at and hopefully that they recognize where they're at. And I think that the learning process continues for people who come into our sort of programs. Most of them are genuine learners.
Mhm.
Some are there to get a certificate or to have a good time or be stimulated or entertained or to do therapy. But most are there, and I trust much more that people with that orientation continue to use life experiences to expand their awareness, and you know, I'm more positive about that. Like it's not a discrete thing like you learn in 4 years.
Right.
some
Yeah.
people learn quickly, others don't.
Yeah.
And
Very
although
true.
I'm quickly, I recognise that I'm a slow learner.
Hmm.
No, I've learned so much, but it's been a long journey, and I'm a stubborn man. I refuse to learn even now sometimes, and then I laugh at myself.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Well, on the other side of that, on the other side of the challenges, what would you say have been some of the highlights or some of those greatest moments for you?
Greatest moments.
Hmm.
Um, well, there are moments in therapy where, when you're working with somebody, where something happens, where somebody wakes up in some way or becomes alive or looks at you like they're looking at you, or there's those sort of moments that make a difference. So I
Mhm.
don't know. They're very important moments that happen. Okay,
Mhm.
uh, and I cherish those moments, and very, very, very occasionally you get feedback which is more solid, like. You might meet somebody 10 years after you see them and they say, well, you changed my life. And I
Yeah.
didn't know that. That's a,
Mhm. Yeah.
it happens in our work. We don't get a lot of feedback, and direct feedback other than what you might notice in those subtle ways. And even there, sometimes you might misperceive and assume something
Right.
good has happened, or vice versa. So, you might assume something not so good has happened. I'll give you an example. I was seeing a woman for at least 3 years in a terrible relationship, and she'd come in every few weeks and tell me more about how this man was traumatizing her and abusing her and not respecting her, and she wasn't getting what she wanted, but no way was she going to leave him. This is the way it has to be this way,
Hmm.
and I used to think, oh my God, I'm wasting my time. I just can't get through to her. It's hopeless. And one day she cancelled an appointment, and then I didn't see her again for 3 years. I didn't see her, and then I was in the local supermarket about 3 months ago, and she ran up to me, hugged me, and said, "Thank you, thank you." So
Oh.
I left him.
Oh.
So, well, no, she made a choice there. But it was something about not knowing,
Mhm.
that. So we don't know a lot in terms of, and also the when you're working with somebody over a long time, you often don't notice stuff that happens. They don't even notice. Okay, or a friend might come in and years later and see you and say, "Well, what happened with that friend of mine? She's so different." But you know, there's very subtle
Mm-hmm.
change. So it's an occupation where you have to be able to tolerate ambiguity and indistinctness in some ways. You don't always know fully,
Right.
and to be able to live with that. If you can't, it's very hard to maintain. But also, in Gestalt, you learn to notice. So you learn to use your ears and your eyes much more effectively. So you probably see a lot more than people that don't have that kind of training or, that background.
Right.
No, it's the little things that I feel good about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And outside of Gestalt, if there is an outside and an inside, as a person, what would you say has been one of the most gratifying experiences of your life?
Outside of Gestalt.
Yeah, I don't know if there is an
I
outside.
I don't know what Gestalt is when you talk about what
I
it is.
don't know either.
Life.
Well, I mean, it probably wouldn't have a client in the office, but for some people, honestly, that's where it happens, and I don't know. So, I mean, as these interviews go on, I really don't even know how to ask my own questions sometimes because,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's many things. There's children, there's grandchildren. My wife, we've been together now 32 years. I think in that relationship, I discovered that I could be loved and that I am
mm,
loved. That's very important for me. I was resistant. Um,
not
I
enough.
know that.
It got through.
I know that now. And she was persistent. That was very important in my life. I'm glad to be alive. I keep active. For an old man, I'm quite physically active. That's an important part. I love gardening. I ride most days in the forest. I do things. I don't just sit and listen. I like to make things and do things.
Mhm.
And mm,
Well, you've mentioned age a couple times, and this is a question that I sometimes ask and I sometimes don't, which is how is your age for you? How is
uh,
this time in your life?
well, I'm lucky. I'm largely good health, so I'm enjoying my body. And although, of course, I think about well, I, I do think about how I might die, and I don't want to die, but you know, but largely it's I'm active, so I perhaps I regret not some things that I could have done it when I was younger that I can't do now. But I am lucky. I don't live in pain. I've had pain. I have 2 knee replacements, so I can. I was a runner for most of my life. Then I couldn't run, so I have
Mm.
2 knees. So I don't have pain, but I can ride my bike. So I love living in my body. So that's and I hope that continues.
Yes, that sounds like a good plan.
What do you know?
Yeah, I don't know where to go with that. So actually, the next question that I do have is what is next for you? What is coming up? If there's plans or projects, or on the other hand, what you think could or should be next for Gestalt?
For Gestalt.
And as whatever that might be in this situation that we're living in the world at this time. Some people have a very clear idea of, it
Yeah,
should go this way. I'm pushing it that way. Some
yeah,
people say, I don't know. So I just ask. I really have no expectation.
yeah. Yeah, well, um, we're living in very, very difficult circumstances, which we've created. So, I mean, I feel quite, I'm not going to say, I want to say I feel sad, but I don't want to start getting upset.
Okay.
So I'm containing that. This is a very bad time for humans. I feel very, very concerned for our children and grandchildren and future children. Hopefully, we humans can cooperate and recognise what's going on, what we've done, not just for the sake of humans, but also the wider living world. So I don't think it's just, I mean, Gestalt has a lot to contribute in terms of acknowledging what we're doing, and with goodwill attempting to deal with it and not live in denial, as we have been living. I knew 50 years ago that we're heading in this direction. There was literature 50 years ago, and we just seem to manage to ignore it. I mean, I don't know how we do that. But I think that is the most important thing, is that we need to attend to, is the way we harm ourselves, we harm the environment, and don't have much capacity for. Well, we have a capacity to be in contact with current experience. We have a well-developed capacity to be in touch with past experiences, but we don't seem to have much capacity for the future in terms of understanding what we're doing, how that might affect. And that might be, maybe that could be something that Gestalt could develop as well. But I think humanity needs to develop an interest and a capacity to be in contact with future possibilities, particularly in these dire circumstances where we're destroying life on Earth and poisoning the Earth. I mean, the Earth will continue when we're irrelevant, but if we want to continue living, I think something like that would be important. That's an interesting thought, but we don't have much capacity to think about our impact now in terms of the future. There's a lot written about it, but very little done about it. And we don't.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it's particularly assimilated in most people.
Mm. Mm.
I include myself. It's an interesting thought, actually. It's the willful ignorance, isn't it?
I'm not sure it's willful. It's just something we neglect. We don't. Maybe that we're not. Our neurological structure doesn't allow it. I don't know. We just do it habitually over and over again.
True.
I don't know, but it's certainly a problem, and maybe it's possible to do something about it. Maybe young people today might be more able to do it. I don't know, but a lot of damage has been done, and how did it get to this?
Our conversation or the state of the world?
Well, I guess it's also, I mean, the pandemic that's happening is just one of the many symptoms of what we've done, I think.
Mm-hmm. It's either a symptom or a symbol. I don't know, but it's
a result, one of the results of what we're doing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's just fascinating how so many different people are dealing with it in so many different ways. That whole process is really interesting to watch. I do deal with it by being in my house with my kids and interviewing random strangers involved in Gestalt therapy. That's I don't know if that's actually helping the world in any way, but it's kind of helping me get through the present as well. So maybe that's part of how we got here. So I will circle back to the first question now that I've been getting to know you a little bit. Is there anything else that you would add to that first question of who you are as a person? Anything that you feel you would like to name?
Yeah, I'm thinking, may not be an answer to your question, but what I'm recognizing is that I still tend to hold back too much, and that maybe I know a lot more that can contribute that way of coming out. My tendency is to go in rather than come out, which is a contradiction in this work. That I often think to write, and I think I've got something to write about, but I stop myself. Remember I said I'm a very private person? It's almost like,
Right.
I want you to know me, but I don't want you to know.
Yes, it's one of those challenges. It is like a very Joe Melnick challenge. It's you can interview me, but I'm not going to come out of myself. So, okay.
It doesn't make it easy for you, but and for other people.
No, but it makes it interesting to be here with you. And I mean, this has been quite enjoyable for me. I'm feeling that maybe it's habit. I don't know. I'm feeling myself pulled more into dialogue with you. But that may be just part of my experiencing being with you. I don't know. Or maybe it's just me showing up a lot today. I don't know.
Yeah, well, are we coming towards the end of this interview?
We are, unless there's anything else in particular you'd like to.
Yeah. Well, what I recognise, again, that last question is that I think I probably have a lot more to give than I do. Okay. And I have some sadness about that, but maybe I could muster up a bit more courage and come out. I mean, I do come out a lot, as I must, because of what I'm doing in my life, but maybe I could offer more. Yeah, so
that
thank
would
you.
Be interesting. No, thank you. Thank you. If there's anything else, this is the time. If not,
it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. It's been lovely.